Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering one of the most powerful characters in the entire game, the ADIN, or Palloc, or Padlock, however you want to refer to it. In my list of the top characters for Honor Mode, I rated this as one of the very best characters that you can play through Honor Mode with, because this character provides some of the highest damage output in the game, incredible spell casting, and excellent defensive utility for your entire team, while also letting you pass all of the dialogue checks in the game and just be an amazing main character overall. This is an update video to my previous guide of the same name, because that guide was done before Honor Mode came out, and this character actually plays quite differently on Tactician mode and lower difficulty levels than it does on Honor Mode. The mechanics of the character actually work significantly differently, so I wanted to update this guide in order to bring it into the modern era. I'm going to be doing that with a couple of my videos that have mechanics that have been changed significantly, just like I did for the base classes as well, so you can look forward to a few more of these in the future, though of course we'll still be making new builds as well. Alright, let's get into it. One of the things that's so cool about this character combination is just how flexible it is. In fact, I think that as long as you get at least 2 levels of Paladin and at least 3 levels of Warlock, you can use literally any combination of the 2 classes, any number of levels from either class, and you'll end up with an extremely powerful and viable character. For that reason, this character, I think, makes an excellent core to any party and is a great character for your main character, because you can customize it to fit what you need from your party and what you want from your playthrough, and also what you find most fun, without sacrificing much in the way of power. I'm going to be telling you my preference for how to build this character, but I do want to mention that this is very flexible, so don't feel like you have to follow every step here exactly, and I will mention some alternative options as we go through, so that you can customize the character as you see fit. I'm using Minthara as the example character here, because of course she is the paladin of the party, but this build is also on flavor and incredible for Wyll as well, and also makes an incredible custom main character, because this character is going to be one of the best in the game at passing dialogue checks, leading the way into combat, and doing excellent melee damage while also being very resilient. So if you are the first through the door as the main character of the party, then this build is excellent for that as well. If you're building this as a custom character, Drow still makes an excellent choice for your race, because their ability to cast darkness once per day synergizes incredibly well with this build's ability to abuse the darkness effects in the game, as well as Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed. Dwergar for out-of-combat invisibility can let you start fights from advantageous locations, or Githyanki for bonus mobility, and the bonus skill access is incredibly useful for a party face, which this character is likely to be as well, to make sure that you can pass knowledge checks or insight checks more easily, since you'll be able to choose intelligence or wisdom skills with your Githyanki knowledge and use that. So those are some options for race picks that synergize very well with this build. The extreme flexibility of the build starts right away with what class we take as our very first level. Starting with Paladin can get us additional heavy armor access, heavy armor proficiency, because you only get heavy armor proficiency if you take Paladin as your first level. You don't receive it if you multi-class into Paladin at later levels. But starting with Warlock can get you to Pact of the Blade sooner, so might make your early game just a little bit smoother. Since the endgame state of the build is stronger if you start with Paladin, and you don't give up much in the way of early game power to start with Paladin, I'm going to recommend starting with Paladin, but either are viable choices. For our subclass, you can also choose any of the 3 Paladin subclasses successfully. This is a very aggressive build, so I'm going to recommend Oath of Vengeance to maximize damage. Inquisitor's Might and later Vow of Enmity are very powerful tools for this build, giving you bonus actions that increase your character's damage dramatically by giving you advantage, as well as adding your charisma to your damage again, but Oath of the Ancients for the additional healing and sort of a more defensive choice, or Oath of Devotion for access to the Sanctuary spell are all viable options. We're going to go with Oath of Vengeance for this character build. For our ability scores, we're going to take a pretty unusual split for a Paladin, where we are sacrificing strength entirely to boost our charisma. That's because the purpose of this build is to use Warlock's Pact of the Blade feature to allow us to attack you with melee weapons using our charisma. So we only need to boost charisma for both our spells and our attack rolls, which means that this character gets to be much more single attribute dependent than paladins normally are. That lets us get away with a much cleaner attribute spread than paladins usually get to take, while still getting all of the advantages of paladins. So we're going to go with 16 charisma, 16 constitution, 14 dexterity, and 12 wisdom. You could reduce your constitution and take increased dexterity, especially for honor mode. In the early game, this can be valuable, but this character will almost always be concentrating on a spell, so having high constitution to allow us to maintain concentration is very valuable for this character. For our skill selection, the only thing that matters is getting access to the dialogue skills, so I'm going to recommend that you get Persuasion for certain, as well as Insight, because having Insight is very useful for a party face. If you are doing this as a custom character, you can use the Guild Artisan background to get both of those and gain proficiency in more of the dialogue skills. All of those options will allow your character to be even better at being a party face, which of course you're already great at. We don't have to make any other decisions at level 1, so let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're going to immediately diverge from Paladin and take a level of Warlock. We want to take Warlock early, so that we get Pact of the Blade as soon as we can, and so that we have our higher level Warlock spells, because that's going to power up our character the most possible. Again, you could take a second level of Paladin and get your smites first, but I prefer getting the Warlock levels online as soon as possible. This also makes your early game much smoother because now you have Eldritch Blast in order to fight with. Since we took low strength and relatively low dexterity, you're going to want to have Eldritch Blast to be your main combat tool up until we get Pact of the Blade and can start making powerful melee attacks. For that reason, we're going to take Eldritch Blast as as one of our 2 cantrips, of course, and as our second cantrip we have a few different options. You can take Minor Illusion here, which you will need if your party doesn't have access to it elsewhere, but this character actually has a few cantrips that are more important to it, so I prefer to get this elsewhere. Every party needs Minor Illusion, though, so priority 1 is making sure that your party has this somewhere, and this character will take it if nobody else can. For our other options, you can take Friends to aid with being the main party face, because Friends is super helpful. Even on honor mode, you can use this to gain advantage on charisma checks and then fast travel out of the location or use Disguise Self in order to not get accused of a crime after casting Friends, and that can just make your party even better at passing dialogue checks. Or you can take Blade Ward. Since this is a melee character that's going to often be surrounded by enemies, Blade Ward can be very useful if you find yourself in a bad situation where you're going to be surrounded by a whole bunch of enemies at once. I'm going to recommend taking Friends at lower levels. We'll pick up Blade Ward at later levels, so we should be able to use our dialogue skills as early as possible. For our subclass, again, we can choose any of the 3 Warlock subclasses, and all of these will be pretty powerful. Fiend gives us access to additional temporary hit points. This character is going to be killing a lot of enemies, so you'll gain a lot of temporary hit points. Great Old One gives you constant free fear effects that you can get on enemies. These don't cost you an action, you just have to critically hit. And since this character's attacking a lot and wants to build critical hit gear to maximize our damage from smite attacks, more on that later, the Mortal Reminder effect will go off pretty frequently and crowd control enemies. Archfey is also really good because we're going to be running up into melee, so this 10-foot radius AoE Frighten can carry your party through the early game, so which this character is a little bit on the weaker side for an honor mode build in the first 3 levels, so Archfey Warlock can fix that entirely by giving you a tool that just wins an encounter on its own. Great Old One is typically the strongest and is the one I'm going to recommend as the most powerful overall, but any of these 3 are very, very good. For our spell selection here, we're going to take Hex. Of course, that goes with the Eldritch Blast that we've already taken and is just a very powerful tool and will help us deal even more damage later on in the game. And we're going to take Dissonant Whispers because this is a very valuable combat spell at low levels, can paralyze a melee enemy or immobilize a melee enemy, which will keep them out of combat for as long as the Dissonant Whispers last. They only get one save against this, and if they fail it, they are out of combat for 2 turns, so you can shut down even very strong enemies with this spell. That's it for level 2. Let's move on to level 3. At character level 3, we're going to take our second Warlock level here, and for our spell selection, we're going to take Armor of Agathys, a very powerful defensive spell that will scale as we level up in Warlock, and while this isn't going to be a primary strategy for this character, you would prefer to use Hex most of the time with your early game spell slots. Armor of Agathys is very helpful if you just have a spell left and are going to short rest anyways. You can turn Armor of Agathys, a short rest resource, into a long rest benefit, which this character is very adept at doing, turning short rests into things that normally you only get with long rests, because we're going to turn our Warlock spell slots into smites. So this character gets to get away with mostly taking short rests and gaining benefits from it all day. Armor of Agathys just makes you a little tougher as well in the early game, which is very nice. For our invocation selection, we're going to follow what I recommend for basically every Warlock and take Agonizing Blast, which powers up our Eldritch Blast. Although this will be primarily a melee character, it's nice to have a very powerful ranged option. It's effectively a bow that you can just have all of the time, with Eldritch Blast being powered up by your Charisma. And again, everything this character does is fueled by Charisma, so Agonizing Blast, very powerful. And of course, we're going to take Devil's Sight to allow us to see in darkness. We can't yet cast darkness, but the ability to see in magical darkness is one of the most broken effects in Baldur's Gate 3, just one of the most powerful things you can be doing, and this character is one of the best in the game at abusing that. At level 4, we're taking our third Warlock level, and of course for our spell selection, we're going to pick up Darkness. Darkness is so powerful because it completely negates the enemy's ability to make ranged attacks into it, unless they can also see through magical darkness, meaning that you can protect your entire party from ranged enemies, but also if you can see through it, you can shoot out of it. If you do so, you gain advantage, and if you're in melee with enemies, you have advantage on all your strikes, and they have disadvantage on all of their strikes, because they'll be blinded by the darkness. So this swings combat massively in your favor. This character can set up kind of a mobile fortress, where you sit in the darkness spell, plinking them with Eldritch Blasts, force the enemy to come to you, and then you obliterate them with your very powerful melee attacks. And so this can give you a whole extra strategic dynamic for your party with the power of the darkness spell. For our Pact boon, we're going to take Pact of the Blade, which will allow us to make melee attacks using our charisma instead of our strength, suddenly turning our character from a weenie into one of the most powerful melee characters in the entire game. We don't need to replace a spell yet. We're still pretty happy with our spell selection here, although if you find you aren't using Dissonant Whispers, you can grab Cloud of Daggers, especially if your party is low on AoE. Cloud of Daggers is a very powerful effect to have, does not rely on a save, so can be used to finish off low health enemies. Or Misty Step if you're worried about your mobility, though we will fix that at later levels as well. That's it for level 4. So, let's go to level 5. And at this point we have a choice. We can either continue taking levels in Warlock to get higher level spells as soon as possible and access to extra attack as soon as possible, or we can take another level in Paladin to gain smites. I'm going to recommend taking a level in Paladin here, because this gets us not only a bunch of very powerful spells for a Warlock, it also gives us access to smites, which let us turn our Warlock spells into huge bursts of melee damage. The power of this cannot be overstated. It lets you be one of the highest single turn damage characters in the game, and because we're going to get these higher level Warlock spells as we level up, higher level than paladins normally get access to for smites, we're going to have the most high level smites of any character in the game, and that will just let us do massive burst damage, flattening enemies. Baldur's Gate is often a game about doing burst damage, and this character is one of the best in the game at it, while also having super powerful ranged combat, utility options from your dialogue skills, and very powerful control from your spells as well. For our fighting style here, we're going to take Great Weapon Fighting, because we just want to increase our damage output as much as possible, although you can also take Defense Fighting style. This character can be played as a more defensive character, or even Protection Fighting style if you want to use a sword and shield, but Great Weapon Fighting is really powerful because the reroll of a 1 or 2 on Great Weapon Fighting works on your smite attacks, so it's going to increase the average damage that you're doing on smites massively, because you're going to reroll low damage dice when you're smiting because of Great Weapon Fighting. For our spells prepared as a paladin, we get access to a bunch of great paladin spells. The most important of these is Command, which you can cast using Warlock spell slots, which automatically levels it up so it targets more creatures, and that's going to let you just shut down whole groups of enemies with a single spell. Bless is very useful even at first level, even if you don't get it till level 5. Bless is just a very powerful effect and a good thing to be concentrating on. You're going to want to take Thunderous Smite, because Thunderous Smite you can use in addition to a smite attack to do even more burst damage with a single attack. As well, I recommend, and then after that, your options are going to be a lot less used. These are the 3 spells that you're going to use most often. So I'm going to recommend taking Protection from Good and Evil and Shield of Faith. These are options that you can use if in certain situations. If you want to be concentrating on a spell, you can use Shield of Faith. Again, if you have like a spell slot left before you short rest, you can use it to cast Shield of Faith. And you can use Protection from Good and Evil in certain encounters to gain a significant edge. At level 6, we're going to take another level of Warlock, getting access to our first feat. Now, it's true that this character does delay getting your first feat by 2 levels, because we so heavily value getting the smite damage. An alternative build is to just play 5 levels of Warlock before you take your 2 Paladin levels. But I think that that's okay for this build, because our burst damage is so high that even though we have slightly lower hit chance than other builds will at this level, thanks to not having leveled up our accuracy stat, our charisma yet, our damage is so high that when we do hit, we're just going to kill everything. So we're still very efficient at actually winning fights. We're going to, for our feat, take an ability improvement to increase our charisma up to 18. Now, a lot of honor mode builds are going to want to take Alert as their first feat, and that's certainly not a bad choice here. We can definitely take Alert and increase our initiative, but because this build does delay access to feats, I'm going to recommend taking the additional charisma early, so to make sure that we're still able to hit our attacks and everything and do high damage, and just use as much initiative gear as you can find on this character in order to fix our relatively low initiative. That's also the main incentive for taking 16 dexterity over 16 constitution, and that's certainly a viable alternate stat split as well. For our cantrip selection here, we're going to go ahead and pick up Blade Ward to make sure that we are able to survive in melee. Remember, we have Armor of Agathis as well, so the Blade Ward can have incoming damage and keep our Armor of Agathis running for longer. Blade Ward is very synergistic with temporary hit points, and very synergistic with heavy armor, much of which comes with damage reduction as well, and we may, at this point, now have, like, the adamantine splint armor, and be able to add the flat damage reduction from that to our percentage damage reduction from Blade Ward, our temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis, and make this character extremely difficult to kill. For our spell selection here, we're going to grab Misty Step, because every character should have access to this somewhere, and we just want to make certain that we are able to move easily around the battlefield. And then at this point, you could swap out Dissonant Whispers for another spell, or you could swap out Hex for a spell that you're going to use less often, because so many of our spell slots are going to be turned into smites that often it can be damage inefficient to spend a spell slot on Hex rather than on just a smite attack. So if you find you're just using all your spells on smites and not ever casting Hex, you can swap that out at this point for Cloud of Daggers, which can help you, finish off low health enemies, or Hold Person. This build is one of the best in the game at using Hold Person, because you love critical hits, and you're very good at landing spells, so if you paralyze an enemy and then you get to critical hit them, it's very, very powerful. So that's certainly a powerful option, especially if you have some plus spell DC gear that this character is able to wear. Like, you don't have many other spellcasters in your party, so you can boost this character's spells DCs and land the Hex more easily. Or the Hold Person, more easily. At level 7, we're going to take our 5th level of Warlock, getting access to 3rd level Warlock spells, which powers up not only our spellcasting, but also our smites massively. At 3rd level, our smites do 4d8 radiant damage, which boosts our damage significantly, and on a critical hit, that's 8d8 additional damage. And this also gives us 2 of the best spells in the entire game, Hunger of Hadar, which will just instantly win encounters against large arrays of enemies, and gives you one of the most potent crowd control options in the entire game, as well as the ability to swap out one of these spells, and I'm going to recommend swapping out Dissonant Whispers at this point to pick up Counterspell. Counterspell is just so valuable to have for a party, and this character has spells that it can refresh on a short rest, so you're going to be able to counterspell many times per day. So even though you won't be as good at countering high-level spells as pure spellcasting characters, this character will still be amazing at casting counterspells, just because of the sheer number that you can cast, and counterspell just lets you trade your reaction for an entire enemy turn, so it's super powerful. Something else to consider with this character is that you don't, up until this point, have amazing uses for your reaction, so this gives you just another whole piece of the turn that you can use to do something awesome with, because you now have a great reaction available. For our Eldritch Invocation here, there are a few different options, many of which are valuable, but with most Warlocks, I'm still going to recommend just taking Repelling Blast. Things like Mask of Many Faces can be fun. Fiendish Vigor can give you additional temporary hit points that over your Armor of Agathys ones. Beguiling Influence, if you don't have proficiency in Deception and Persuasion, can get you some skill points for those as well. But Repelling Blast just gives you a very powerful option to reposition enemies, push them back into your Hunger of Hadar or away from your vulnerable party members, and since this is a character without strength, so we can't use athletics, having an alternate way to push enemies is really good, because you can knock them off cliffs for instant kills, reposition them into hazards, just lets you control the battlefield much better. At level 8, we are going to deviate again and go back into Paladin. The reason for this is we just want to get our second feat as soon as possible, and also the 3rd level Paladin subclass feature is very good. Vow of Enmity lets you gain advantage on attack rolls against a specific enemy as a bonus action, which obviously is super powerful for a build that wants to critically hit very frequently. Now, this build is very good at getting advantage on its attacks. One of the items we're going to use just gives you advantage on attacks, and also you have Darkness to gain advantage on attacks, but Vow of Enmity is still very powerful. Also, at time of recording, Vow of Enmity is still bugged, and if you cast this on yourself rather than on an enemy, you just gain advantage on all attacks for the duration of the 10 turns of the Vow of Enmity, rather than just against a specific enemy, which obviously is incredibly powerful as an effect. Even if without using that bug, though, this is still just a very valuable effect for boss fights, just lets you critically hit more often, land your attacks more often, and so on, so Vow of Enmity is just very, very powerful. I do kind of like that bug, because it is the Paladin declaring themselves their own worst enemy, and then lashing out at everyone around them, which seems on flavor for a Vengeance Paladin, and also for Minthara in particular. You also get Hunter's Mark, which does a decent Hex impression, since we swapped out Hex. Now if you want that effect, you have it available from Hunter's Mark. Then, at Paladin level 4, we're going to take another feat, and we're just going to boost our Charisma up to 20. This character needs Charisma for its spell save DCs, its accuracy, its damage with Eldritch Blast, its damage with attacks, so just boosting our Charisma as much as possible, as quickly as possible, is the most powerful thing that we can do with our feats. At this next level, level 10, the build actually changes depending on your difficulty level. Because of the way Pact of the Blade works in Honor mode specifically, the mechanics are different on Honor mode than they are on Tactician mode or below. So I'm going to show you both versions of the build to make sure that you have the best option available for whatever difficulty setting you're playing on, because the mechanics actually work quite differently. I'm going to start by showing you what we'll do on Tactician mode, and then we will jump back to what we'll do on Honor mode. There will be timestamps so you can jump ahead if you're just looking for the Honor mode version of the build. On Tactician mode, we are going to go to level 10, and at level 10, we're going to take our 5th level of Paladin. This gets us access to extra attack, which on Tactician or below stacks with the Pact of the Blade extra attack to give you 3 attacks in a round. This is way more powerful than anything else you can be doing, because 3 attacks in a round, all of which use your charisma, are incredibly powerful and just maximize your damage drastically. That gives you up to 3 smites per turn if you're willing to burn a lot of spell slots on it, as well as just increasing your damage output significantly just from the sheer number of attacks you're doing. You can now take 2 more levels of Paladin and go Oathbreaker Paladin to add your charisma to damage on every single swing, which is, of course, very powerful, or you can just maximize your spell slots by going for Warlock. I'm going to recommend taking 2 more Paladin levels here, because that gets us Aura of Protection, which increases our saving throws by our charisma, and again, lets you add your charisma to just about everything that the character is doing. And then at level 7, for Oath of Vengeance doesn't give you much in particular, but for the Oath of the Ancient Paladin will have incoming damage from spells, so for a more defensively oriented version of the character is very, very powerful. And for Oathbreaker Paladin will let you add your charisma to your damage again, so you'll be adding plus 10 to every swing that you're making with this attack, with this character, and since you're attacking 3 times per round, that makes your damage incredibly strong. For our prepared spells from level 2, we don't need anything in particular. You're just going to want something that is... you're just going to want things that might come up situationally, like Lesser Restoration, maybe you want protection from poison for a certain encounter, that kind of thing, because almost all of your spell slots are going to be used for smites anyways. This build finishes with lower level smites than if you took 2 more levels of Warlock, but the sheer damage output from Oathbreaker Paladin, if you break your Paladin Oath to increase your damage from charisma even further, more than makes up for it. At 10th level on Honor mode, rather than taking a second Paladin level, because Extra Attack and Pact of the Blade Extra Attack do not stack on Honor mode, we don't need to go to Paladin level 5, and instead can increase our spell proficiency even more by taking another Warlock level. This gets us Entropic Ward, which is pretty powerful, just another powerful reaction ability that makes this character even better at surviving, and also gives us additional spell access. Here I'm going to recommend taking Hypnotic Pattern, because it will work very well with some items that are one of this character's potential options for broken combinations, and also just can shut down entire encounters. This character really wants to have spells that are like 10 out of 10s in some encounters, and 3 out of 10s in other encounters, rather than a bunch of spells that are sort of 5 out of 10 in every encounter, because your default action with spells is to turn them into smites. So you're only ever going to cast a spell if it's better than a gigantic amount of burst damage. Hypnotic Pattern sometimes will be, so it's very much worth picking up. At Warlock level 7, we get 4th level spells. Unfortunately, 4th level spells for Warlocks are not that exciting, but you can use Evard's Black Tentacles to shut down large groups of enemies. It is a powerful control spell for Warlocks. Typically, you're going to be concentrating on Hypnotic Pattern or on Hunger of Hadar, but Evard's Black Tentacles can combo very well with an ally's Wall of Fire, for example, because it can be overlaid on top of other things. Or you just take Banishment. Banishment is very powerful because it targets an enemy's charisma save, and some bosses have very low charisma saves, so you can use this to just instantly win certain encounters. For our Eldritch Invocation here, you can take Dreadful Word to allow you to cast Confusion, giving you yet another option. This is very good because it doesn't target allies, so you can cast it into melee and hit a bunch of enemies with it, even if your party is all tangled up with the enemies, which, since this is a melee character, is pretty valuable. At character level 8, or 12, we're going to take our 8th level of Warlock, which doesn't get us new spell access, but of course gets us another feat, and feats are just so good that it's very much worth doing that. There's a few different options for feats that we can take here, all of which will boost our character in different ways. You can still grab Alert, or have picked this up earlier, in order to guarantee winning initiative. This character loves initiative gear, but if you need it on other party members, it's never wrong to take Alert on Honor Mode. Another option is to take Great Weapon Master, since we're going to be attacking with two-handed weapons. This will boost our damage output on all of our swings vastly. An additional 10 damage is a lot of additional damage. And also lets us attack with bonus actions, so we can just make even more attacks after landing a critical hit or killing an enemy, which we will be doing constantly. Or we can take Savage Attacker, which lets us roll our damage dice twice and use the higher result. We're going to be rolling a lot of damage dice thanks to Smiting, so Savage Attacker increases our average damage significantly. In general, of these three, I personally prefer taking Great Weapon Master over Savage Attacker, although also you can use story events to boost your charisma instead of taking feats that boost your charisma and grab both. The reason being that when you are expending a smite slot, you're already doing a massive amount of damage. So you usually don't need to make the average damage of your smites higher. I prefer to just have higher damage on my non-smite attacks to give me more longevity throughout the day. If you're long resting very frequently, or short and long resting very frequently, you may be better off with Savage Attacker just boosting your smite damage output. And neither of these are wrong to take. And you will certainly see a lot of build guide creators recommending Savage Attacker. I think that Great Weapon Master provides more consistency to the build, so that's what I'm going to recommend. Increases your maximum damage as well as your average damage, so makes you more likely to kill an enemy in a single swing, and also boosts your damage when you're not smiting by a significant margin as well. For our spell selection here, by this point in the game, you should know what utility spells your party is missing, so you can go back for one of those, pick up Invisibility or something like that, or just grab Black Tentacles because you might want to lock down enemies in some circumstances. Any of those options are fine. The last spells that you take on your Warlock spell list are almost always going to be smites, so these are really just very marginal picks, but ones that can be super situational. So you could even pick up something like Dimension Door, which is really good in some encounters, or Dispel Magic, or Remove Curse, though you should be able to have access to that more easily elsewhere. But something like Dimension Door can give your party an additional option, even though you'll almost never cast it, but whatever spell you take here is usually going to be a smite anyways. Alright, that is the build, but of course we can power it up even further with items, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, we have a few priorities. First and foremost, especially if you took 14 dexterity and didn't take the alert feat, is to boost your initiative. So anything that increases your initiative is of course very valuable for this character. Items like the Fistbreaker Helm that give you initiative and save DC are very good as well, and one that you should definitely keep an eye out for in the early game is the Bow of Awareness. This is available very early in the game and can boost your initiative passively without taking up your weapon slot, because you just get the passive benefit when you have the bow equipped, even if you are holding your main hand melee weapon. So the Bow of Awareness is just very good for this character, can help you go first in the early game, and make your playthrough much more consistent. In addition to boosting your initiative, you're looking for a good weapon, of course, and some weapons that I think are really good. In the early to mid game, the Unseen Menace is very valuable for this character. It increases your chance to critically hit, which is also something that we're very interested in. Anything that increases our chance to critically hit is super good for this character, since critical hits double our smite damage, which will let us obliterate enemies immediately. And it has advantage on all of its attacks. The Soulbreaker Greatsword is also one I like quite a lot, because the +2 bonus to initiative is excellent. If you are a Githyanki or disguised as a Githyanki, it also does additional damage, and the stun is really good for this character as well. This character's actual weapon damage doesn't matter that much, because so much of our damage comes from smites, Great Weapon Master, and so on. So you're looking for weapons with powerful effects more than you are for weapons with super high damage at later levels. Of course, you do want a two-handed weapon to make use of Great Weapon Master and Great Weapon Fighting. In addition to that, in the later game, once you've boosted your initiative with other sources, the Deadshot can be very good if no other party member needs it. It just increases your chance to critically hit. We're also looking for the best heavy armor that we have available. For most of the early and mid-game, this will be the Adamantine Splint. Reducing incoming damage is great for this character that has temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis and can cast Blade Ward that can make you almost unkillable. An alternative setup is to use one of the medium armors, like the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail, that doesn't cap your dexterity modifier that you add to your armor class, so you can add as much dexterity as you have to your armor class with this one, alongside the Gloves of Dexterity, which are excellent for this character because initiative and armor class are one of the things that are two of the things that this character is lower on. You have incredible damage, control, and utility, but you do need a little bit of help in those areas. So the Gloves of Dexterity just totally solve that problem and let you put those extra points into Wisdom as well. Increasing your Charisma with things like the Birthright Hat is very valuable, and sources of guaranteed critical hits and increased damage, like the Killer's Sweetheart or the Strange Conduit Ring, are very good. To defend yourself as well, anything that increases your armor class is pretty valuable. You usually won't need saving throw increases, because you have Wisdom save proficiency, 12 Wisdom, so you're not typically at risk from things that target your saves. And of course we have high constitution, so we can maintain concentration, but the Cloak of Protection and similar things that make us better at defending ourselves are always very powerful. Special mention for the Boots of Striding as well, which make you immune to being knocked prone and shoved while you're concentrating, which you almost always will be, so that can make sure that enemies can't push you away in order to get away without tanking an attack of opportunity, and just make you even more efficient at what you're doing, and also make you immune to being knocked prone, which of course is very valuable. You should also make sure that you or your party members have access to Arrows of Darkness, because being able to set up a field of darkness just for an action rather than having to cast a spell is great. That can make sure you're always fighting in darkness. And of course, this character gets access to one of the most broken combinations in the game, the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, which gives you bonus to your save DCs whenever you hit with a weapon attack, which you're doing constantly, alongside the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, which lets you cast spells, illusion or enchantment spells, as a bonus action. Many of our powerful spells are illusion or enchantment spells, including Command, Hold Person, and Hypnotic Pattern, so this is going to let you dish out amazing damage, increase your save DCs to levels where enemies simply cannot pass the saves on these spells, and then shut down entire encounters in a single go. So this is just one of the most broken mechanics in the entire game. Will easily win you Act 3 if you use this combination of items together, and so highly recommended if you just want to shut down every encounter before it starts. This character is also one of the best in the game at using Illithid Powers, because you get to benefit from both the powers that are focused more for spellcasters and the ones that are focused for martial characters, because you do both. In particular, Luck of the Far Realms is amazing for you, because critical hits let you double your smite damage, which is awesome, as well as Favorable Beginnings, because this works for both your party face checks. Since you're a party face, you get the bonus against it when you're making dialogue checks, and for your attacks, which obviously is awesome as well. In addition to that, just trying to find it, hang on. Oh my goodness, I checked the wrong Illithid power every time before I found the right one. Psionic Overload does great damage because you're attacking so frequently, so you can use all of the damage-focused powers as well. And Cull the Weak, of course, this character's killing enemies constantly, so this just makes you even better at killing enemies and chaining the damage through all of them. So this character benefits really strongly from Illithid powers. I would get those 4 first, because they're just going to massively increase the power of your character. Of course, if you're Minthara, you start with a bunch of Illithid powers unlocked as well, which gives her even more power level to use with this class. Alright, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed this look at the Lockett-in, one of the most powerful characters in the entire game. Gives you amazing burst damage, amazing sustained damage, amazing utility, and very, very hard to kill. So overall, just one of the best characters you can play for Honor Mode, and should work in just about any party because it can fill different roles depending on what your party needs. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a comment and like the video. It helps me out a ton with the algorithm when people do that, so I do appreciate you taking the time to do so. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate guides and other strategy game content. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.